Okay, so welcome everybody to our summer health chat series. I am more than thrilled to have a co-partner tonight that's going to be leading this, and just really excited. Some of you have been on our health chats before, and you get to hear from me quite often. But tonight we're in for a real treat because my husband, David Colby, I don't usually call him doctor, but he is Dr. David Colby, will be joining us tonight, talking about this book, and I'm really going to let him talk about all of that piece of it. But we have the author of the book joining us tonight as well, Dr. Steve Chaney. So welcome, Dr. Chaney, and anybody from the Chaney organization in Shackley. For those of you who might not be familiar, some of you are, everybody comes from different backgrounds on these chats. Dr. Steve Chaney and his wife Suzanne have been with Shackley for around 50 years. I asked them that today, and they are master coordinators in Shackley. So that's how we know the Cheneys, and I'm sure some of you also know them from that, from Shackley. So welcome to everybody. It's really exciting to have a nice group joining us tonight to learn a little bit about this book that David's going to go through his discussing a little bit on, and encouraging you all to read it yourselves. That's a really great thing to do. So I want to just introduce you to my husband, David. If you're not familiar with him and his background, he's a great resource to me and my health and wellness business with Shackley because David is a wealth of knowledge. He is somebody who has a lot of background in this topic of supplements, and tonight we're going to talk about food, which is why he's going to be talking about this book. Which is exciting. But with David's background, he has a PharmD, so he has a pharmacy degree, and as well as a PhD in chemistry. He is an associate professor at the University of Mississippi. We live here in Oxford, Mississippi, and David trains pharmacy students in the School of Pharmacy. He does research with natural products and dietary supplements as well as pharmaceuticals. David, as well as Dr. and Mrs. Chaney, are part of the Shackley Field Science team. We got to go out to the headquarters in California a few years ago and tour the science facilities and meet the scientists, and that was really, really an exciting highlight of what we've been doing with the company. And so he teaches medicinal chemistry. Like I said, he trains pharmacy students. And he's going to tonight share a little bit, like I said, on his thoughts on Dr. Chaney's book, Slaying the Food Myths, which is a new book that I think you're going to get excited about learning about tonight. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my wonderful husband, David Colby, and I'll let him take it from here.
Well, thank you, Rebecca, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you all for joining us tonight. And also thanks to Dr. Steve Chaney for joining us. So we're going to have a nice little summer chat series, and this is going to kick it off. I wanted to spend a little time talking about the book. Oh, I see that it appears backwards in Zoom, but that's good. You can see it on the slide. This book recently came out, Slaying the Food Myths. Got a copy right away, and I read it, and I was very surprised and pleased at the quality of this book, how well it's written. And I was talking to Rebecca and other people, and the opportunity came up, and like, well, I'll just give a quick book review on this. But I will do a spoiler alert. I'm not actually going to tell you what's in the book. I'm just going to tell you about the book. That way, encourage you to read it because I really do think it's an excellent book. I currently keep a copy in my office as a reference. And I'm even consider using it in some of my future classes. I'll be teaching nutritional pharmacology. It really has a lot of good content that I have enjoyed, and that's why I'm kind of making the recommendation for you today. So first off, I'm going to tell you about the book, tell you a little bit more about the author, how the book came about, and then some of the major topics that are really, fundamental to the topic. So first off, let's talk about the author, Steve Chaney. He is a distinguished professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in the departments of biochemistry and biophysics and also nutrition. Just so I can put something into context, Dr. Chaney is an expert on this topic. Many of you are not in academia, so you might not be familiar with the ranks. It goes from assistant professor, associate professor, full professor. And then there's a very small group of faculty Only when they receive an international reputation of excellence are they allowed to apply for the rank of distinguished professors. It's actually so rare that there are many universities in the United States and colleges that don't even offer this rank. I can tell you at the University of Mississippi, we've been around since 1848, where I'm currently on faculty, and we have a total of 3 distinguished professors at our university. And the most recent one had over 700 papers. So you really have to achieve quite a lot in your career in order to achieve that rank. So I've been enormously impressed with Dr. Chaney's career, and he is an expert on this topic about food and nutrition. And this is important because a lot of the books that you'll see about food, even diet books, they're written by a self-proclaimed guru or a social justice warrior or someone who is deemed an expert, but not really an expert. Well, Dr. Chaney is an expert, and that impresses me because, again, with this book, not only has he presented the information, but he's also done his homework at a pretty substantial level, and I'll go to that a little more in just a minute. But Dr. Chaney wrote this book because he teaches medical students, or taught a lot of medical students, nutrition, and he found they'd come to the classes very confused on some important topics. So that gives you an opportunity as a professor to really teach people about nutrition. Now, I teach pharmacy students. Most of what I teach is medicinal chemistry. I also teach them about dietary supplements, and I'm moving into more teaching nutrition because there's a huge need, even with pharmacy students, to understand nutrition because it's really fundamental to good health. But outside the context of healthcare professionals, generally people are quite confused about foods and nutrition. I mean, there's so many examples. If you just think of an egg, wonderful example. People have been told, do not eat eggs. They're not healthy for you because they're high in cholesterol. Then they came back and they told us, you can eat eggs, but only the egg whites. Then they came and said, actually, it's okay to eat eggs. So when you see the experts constantly changing, people get very confused. They don't really know what to believe. So some of this is why this book, Slaying the Food Myths, was written. Now, like I said, the book has an excellent style. It's very easy to read. It's good reference. It also has citations. So if you want to look up some of the trials he talks about in PubMed, it's pretty easy to find. But I will say he's a professor. So he's going to put all the technical language that you'd expect to hear. But if you're not an expert in the field, he goes and defines it. And so someone who doesn't have the training can really understand the topic as he's trying to discover it. Now, I can also say one more thing. As a professor, he does have a professorial sense of humor. So he does put a few jokes in there, and I appreciate that being a professor, but it's not overdone. It's just all around top-notch job. I'll try and get my slide. Okay. All right, I'm going to try again. Okay, so I've told you what the book is. Now I'm going to tell you what it isn't. It is not persuasive writing. Now this is important. I want to talk about this in a little more detail. All right, my slides are giving me a little bit of trouble here. So let me give you a definition of persuasive writing, and we'll see why this is important. Persuasive writing is presenting evidence and reasoning to convince the reader to sign with the writer. Now, what is persuasive writing? Well, it has 3 elements. That is, you give evidence to support a position. You then give evidence to refute the opposing position, and then you neutralize the objectives. Now, persuasive writing is very common if you think now in the media. Whenever there's something that comes in the news, depending on what source you like, they use persuasive writing, and then the other news, they say fake news. And if you read a news article from different sources, although they're on the same topic, a lot of times there's almost no overlap because they're both using persuasive writing. Now, persuasive writing can be effective to convince someone of something, but the biggest issue that I have with it is it's not fair and it's not balanced. So that's a big issue when you're talking about books in this group, this genre, because Many books don't have that balanced perspective. Other books have an agenda. They want to sell you something. They want to sell you a diet. They want to sell you miracle foods. They have an agenda. I can give you an example of other books with an agenda. Here's another one. I actually have quite a few of them. Many books that are, for example, trying to tell you, GMO is bad, or in this case, the one I just held up, gluten is bad, but they're all using persuasive writing. For me, that is not fair, that is not balanced, and what it really does is I have to do the work, because I have to look in both sides of the issues in order to actually arrive at a decision. So again, why I like this book so much is it is not persuasive writing. It's very well balanced. The author does not have an agenda, so it makes it much more credible. It actually makes it easier to read and easier to really understand what's going on. The next thing that I'm going to show is, since Dr. Chaney is an expert, he really does not bow to the authorities. He doesn't bow to the king. So I have an example here of, we're talking about the kings recently in our pharmacy school. Most of you know we have heard me talk about, we have the National Center for Natural Products in a huge greenhouse. This is a picture of Titan arum, which is actually the largest unbranched flower in the world. It's the king of all flowers. It only blooms once every 10 to 15 years, and we just had it on display, so I thought that would be a nice picture to put up from our pharmacy school. But as I said, in the book, Dr. Chaney's an expert. He doesn't bow to the authorities. Just because an authority or another expert says something, he just doesn't take it as fact. He even moves it to the next level. You think about professional societies, cardiovascular disease, huge problem in the United States. The American Heart Association, the AHA, makes many recommendations about diet and eating. Also important societies, the International Society for Sports Nutrition makes recommendations. What I like about this book is Dr. Chaney talks about these recommendations, but he doesn't just take them, as the word of God. He presents the recommendations, he provides additional information so you can understand it. Then what he does is he provides the data that they use to arrive at that recommendation, and even shows the data that they might have looked at that doesn't support the recommendation, but explains why they didn't use that data in making their final recommendation. And that's something that was really impressive to me as to how well done this book truly is. So he goes into that level of detail. Again, it's easy to read, a very nice, clean, crisp style, and he even summarizes major clinical trials, which form the basis of so much of what we recommend in nutrition as well as with diets. The organization of the book is quite succinct. He starts off talking about why nutrition is so important. I mean, it's obviously inherently important in a country like the United States, where we're one of the most obese citizens in the world. He then moves into explaining why nutrition is confusing. I've already talked about this a little bit. And then he goes into another important topic, and that is, how is science done? How are the studies done? And how are these clinical trials done? So, he's a scientist and I'm a scientist, but many people are not. So he goes into the effective level of detail and explains how we do science as scientists. So here's an example of a 96 well plate. If you're a scientist, you could probably look at this data and very quickly figure out what's going on. But if you're not, you need some additional explanation. So he talks about this book. In his book, he talks about how to understand the experiments that are done, really captures them as what are the secrets that scientists know. And he also talks about clinical trials. A clinical trial is when you test something in humans. He talks about how we evaluate the strength of a clinical trial. He talks about different types of clinical trials, so that way people can understand, okay, this is the data that was used that allowed scientists and other nutritionists to make this conclusion, this recommendation. To me, that's very enlightening. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about science in dieting to put something into perspective, something else that he kind of sprinkles through his book, but again, it's a message that he's communicating that is lost, and sometimes it can lead to a lot of frustration, because I know some people, come to Shackley and they're interested in losing weight. So I'm going to give you an analogy. An analogy which I've talked about is the peanut analogy. If you think about a peanut, it's a source of nutrition. There are lots of children that have peanut butter sandwiches. They eat it all the time. You get your fats, you get your proteins. Peanuts are good. I like to eat them, but at the same time, some people don't like the taste of peanuts. That's perfectly normal. There are also people who will eat a peanut and it just doesn't agree with them. It upsets their stomach. Now, there is a group of patients that when they eat a peanut, they have a severe allergic response, and that can cause a life-threatening reaction in their body. So really think about that peanut analogy. Now, in the media, and especially on social media, they would say, oh, the peanut's a terrible thing. We're all a slave of the big peanut. It's just trying to make money, but people are dying all around. That's not the case. That's not an appropriate perspective. You look at a peanut and say, okay, this is the reality. Now I'm going to apply that to a clinical trial. So think now that we've talked about a peanut, the simple realities of it, think about a diet. In your mind, think about the perfect diet, whatever you think it is. Think about the perfect diet. And we're going to run a clinical trial. So we are going to put 100,000 people onto your perfect diet. And I'm going to wave a magic wand. I'm going to say one thing. They are going to follow the diet to the T. They're not going to cheat. They're not going to take an extra slice of chocolate cake. They're going to follow the diet. And you're going to run the clinical trial. Now, if you've been following along, you have to appreciate that there are going to be some people, some patients that are doing your diet that gain weight. Now think about that. There are many people who start on a diet, they gain weight, they get frustrated and upset and say, everything, I'm a failure, everything that I do, all I do is gain weight. No, that's actually not reality. People gain weight on clinical trials. That's actually expected when you design trials. And just putting that information out to the reader, because if the laugh that's lost, that puts things into perspective, that you really need to make an effort for eating healthy and trying to learn more about nutrition. And so he points this out. He sprinkles these important facts that are lost throughout his book. And again, this is another reason why I wanted to give this evaluation today. So he talks about how to do science. And of course, he talks about food myths. Obviously, you're talking about a book entitled Slaying the Food Myths. A major portion are the food myths. So of course, we'll start off. I live in Mississippi. When my wife and I drive up north, there's a little bakery and that we stop in occasionally, and you can see this in the window. Chocolate-covered bacon. So, if you've been following the news, you know that chocolate is absolutely wonderful. So, think about this. Do you really think this is healthy and something good to eat? Well, like I said, I'm going to tell you about the book. I'm not going to tell you what's in the book. If you want to find out what the final decision, according to Dr. Chaney, is on chocolate, you need to read the book. But again, it's major food myths. You're talking about chocolate, sugar, diet foods, fats, oils, protein, meat, organic foods, GMO, and more. All of these things are, at the forefront of your mind when you think about nutrition and when you think about eating. And he really grabs a hold of myths that are out there, breaks them down, explains what they are, explains where they come from. And he hits on all these myths, again, in his usual effective style. And he also goes into another level of detail when he starts explaining the labels and explaining common ingredients that are used in many of these foods. And then, like I said earlier, he has no agenda. He's not trying to sell you a diet. He's not trying to sell you some miracle food. So with that, you get this nice balanced perspective, and it's one that I really appreciate. And one, like I said, I'm really thinking about using this in some of my upcoming classes because I know my college students will appreciate that as well. So in addition to talking about myths, I've already touched on this, you got to talk about diets. And he does that. He does justice to the diets. He talks about the common diets. He talks about what they are, how to evaluate these diets, and just gives a major overview of many of the important diets that you hear about. Like I said, we live in Mississippi. Here's an example from one of the restaurants that we visited in Mississippi. And if you're not familiar with this state, usually if you come to a restaurant and it looks a little sketchy, you might be a little bit uncomfortable stepping through the door, it's probably going to be outstanding food. Might not be healthy, but it tastes really good. So here's a picture: eat or we both will starve. Something from, state of Mississippi. But as I said, he's going to talk about the common diets. You're talking about the paleo diet, the Mediterranean diet. If you've been following the national news, the Mediterranean diet, because of changes in clinical trial data, has been in the national news twice in the past 2 weeks. Now, if you've read the book, you know the information and you understand the diet, so you really can understand, again, also with persuasive writing, now that we've talked about that, what a Mediterranean diet can do and can't do. He touches on other important diets such as keto, vegan, vegetarians. Do vegetarians just live longer than all of us? Well, you have to read the book to find out. Talks about the DASH diet, the MIND diet, and other things such as the low-carb diet. He also then reviews the clinical studies to see how effective these diets are. He talks about the pros, he talks about the cons, he talks about how safe these are and how efficacious they are. And then the other thing that he does, again, I've read quite a few diet books, but he says something which to me I was shocked when I read it. He actually says, how easy is it for you to use this diet? When I read that, I'm like, wow, you almost never hear that. You're just told, here's the diet, do it. But really, that's a reality. Some diets can be very difficult to follow. And just having a book that says, hey, this diet, it takes a lot of effort, it's difficult to follow, that's something that people need to read and people need to hear. Again, he's not trying to sell a diet. So he does justice to looking critically at the diets and explaining where they came from. He also talks about how diets change. When I was in pharmacy school, they told us people who have high cholesterol need to go on the step 1 diet. Step 1 diet was to help them lower their levels of cholesterol. Now, if that doesn't help, we progress to a step 2 diet. That's what I was trained in pharmacy school. But the reality is, shortly after I graduated, they said, you know what, no more step diet. It needs to be replaced. It's not effective. When you look at the data, you realize that diets change. So you need to know what data is out there, how strong the data is to support that. Then you can understand when additional data comes out whether you should stay on that diet or not. The other thing that he touches on is the blue zones. Now here's a picture that we had after a nice rainstorm. And if you see, it's not just one rainbow, it's 2. I like that because you see the nice blue sky. But again, it's not actually what a blue zone. A blue zone are these places in the world where you have a group of people that have a substantial amount of longevity. That is, they live a long life. Some of them actually they have the highest proportion of people who live over the age of 100. So there have been a lot of studies and people are trying to look at that. What are these people doing that the general population isn't doing? What can we apply that? He touches on this, especially in the context of how it relates to food, eating, and diets. This is something that is very new. The blue zones have just really been moving forward. So touching on this current event, is a great perspective because a lot of people want to really eat certain foods to maximize their health and live as long as they can. So touching on this topic again is an important one. Let's see, lastly, after the blue zones, he has a few more important points to make, and then he includes references. If you're like me, you start pulling those references and those citations and start reading to see, okay, what is the additional information? Those are there, a valuable reference to pharmacy students when I start to use it. So finally, as I've said, what should you do? Should add this book to your shopping cart. I have purchased over about a half dozen copies, loaned some out to my colleagues, loaned some out to my students. I've read the book. I wrote a review on Amazon. Actually, I think they gave it the 5-star review. And like I said, I'm considering it for my classes in nutrition. It's a great reference. I have it here. I'd encourage you to add it to your cart. And also, if you're interested, you could email Rebecca or I, because Dr. Chaney also did a nice segment on NPR, National Public Radio, out of North Carolina. And he talks more about his book if you want more details. And I'm very happy because I think he's on the line here today. So that is the end of my review. And like I said, I think it's a great one. Go out and get it.
Yeah. Thank you, David. That was really informative. I always enjoy listening to your perspective on things, and I'm happy that so many people were on tonight. Dr. Chaney is on, and I did not tell him that I was going to ask him this, but if he has, Dr. Chaney, if you are able to unmute and if you have anything to add or want to add, and if not, that's fine. We're just happy to have you here. Or if anybody else has questions, feel free to unmute or chat in the chat box.
Well, David, I'd like to thank you for your kind words. I really appreciate what you said. And again, coming from you, that means a lot to me. But, I don't really have anything to add. If people have questions, I'll be glad to address some questions. But, your talk was perfection. What could I add to that?
Well, like I said, I enjoyed the book, so happy to do it. And yeah, best of luck.
Thank you.
Well, it's been very popular, on Facebook within the Shackley family. I see lots of buzz about it, just about daily. So it's exciting, and yeah. Does anybody else have questions for Dr. Chaney or David? I'm sure Dr. Chaney will probably answer any of the questions. But anybody have anything you want to ask?
Yes, I had just a quick question. How will we be able to get the recording of this?
Yeah.
This presentation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I am recording this, so after I will post it to different groups on Facebook that I'm a part of. Ken, whose group are you a part of? And I'll make sure you get it.
Steve Chaney.
Okay, well, I know how to get it to him, so I'll get the recording to Dr. Chaney, and then he can disperse it to you and whoever else wants it. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Anybody else have any other questions that they want to ask? If not, I want to just share a couple things that's upcoming with our Health Chat series. David will be joining us again in July and also in August, and I have the dates if anybody is interested in joining for those. July 18th is, I believe, also a Wednesday, and he's going to be talking about the adulteration and contamination of weight loss supplements, which is another big topic in the news. If you've been in Shackley for a while, you might be familiar with the Better Health in 31 Days site. And Dr. Chaney has several recordings on there talking about different health topics and such. And David also has two on there. One is on the adulteration and contamination of dietary supplements, and another one is called How a Great Supplement is Born. So if you're interested in listening to those past recordings, we can get those, or joining us on July 18th for the weight loss portion of that going to be sharing. Please let me or whoever invited you know that, and we'll be able to get you the links. And then on August the 8th, he's going to be doing another one, which is an interesting topic, I think, basically dealing with rejection in sales, but also relaying it as a professor to publications. It's very difficult, and both Dr. Chaney and David can speak on this, to get publications published in peer-reviewed journals. And of course, Shackley has over 100 of them. And I think if you're in the Shackley field, it might be interesting to hear that. But he's going to relay it to us as perhaps sales leaders in Shackley, and how it's sometimes difficult in that aspect as well. So that's August the 8th. And then next week, Thursday, I'm going to be doing one on Love Your Life with Healthy Nutrition. So you're all welcome to join us Thursday night at 8 o'clock Central next week. And I think that's the other things that I wanted to mention. Anybody else have anything, last minute questions or anything before we sign off?
Rebecca?
Yes.
Hey, this is Gwen Halsey. I was just wondering if you had any other feedback about the keto, because I've had several. It's very, very popular, and people are not wanting to do shakes that even have carbs in them.
That's a great question for Dr. Chaney, probably.
So yes, I go into great detail about the keto diet. It's one of the ones I reviewed in my book. And like all the other diets, there are some good points to it. I mean, after all, it is a whole food diet. And that, I think, anytime you have a whole food diet, it's, that's an advantage. You get rid of the sodas, the junk foods. That's a huge advantage. I am a little bit concerned about any diet that eliminates whole food groups, because, as I said, we have 5 food groups for a reason. Not only they provide vitamins and minerals, those we can potentially make up from supplements, but there's phytonutrients, fiber, And by the way, there are different kinds of fibers. So anytime you're eliminating whole food groups, it's a little bit problematic. But the big thing, my issue is there are some diets out there for which we have long-term studies showing that they're healthy. So these would be primarily plant-based diets, anywhere from vegan through Mediterranean, DASH Mind, all of those diets. Well, DASH diet, not Mind diet. That's a relatively recent one. But all of those diets, we've got long-term studies that show that people who follow those diets for 10, 20, 30 years have a reduced, generally way less, a reduced risk of heart attack, stroke, diabetes, cancer. This is what matters, health outcomes. Ketosis really was meant, we can think of it as being designed as a short-term metabolic adaptation to starvation. It's meant to allow us to cope with starvation for a short period of time and prolong life for maybe a few weeks or a few months. But it was never designed, never tested for long-term, day after day, month after month, year after year use.
Oh, wow.
And, there's no evidence currently that it's safe. And there are a number of reasons, which I outline in my book, to suspect that it might not be safe long-term. It might not be healthy long-term. So somebody's using a keto diet, they're planning to follow it for a long period of time. They're just doing a massive experiment with their body, which they don't know what the health outcome is going to be.
Wow, yikes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That is a popular one that we see a lot in social media and such. Thank you for that insight. Anybody else have any last questions for anybody here? If not, I encourage you all to pick up a copy of Dr. Chaney's book, or pick up a few copies and share it with friends. You can get it, I know, on Amazon. There's probably other sites, probably anywhere books are sold. Dr. Chaney, is that correct?
No, not anywhere books are sold. I've got a couple of local bookstores, but if you're not in the Chapel Hill, Raleigh-Durham area, they probably don't help you. And if you want to check it out, take a sort of a peek under the cover before you go to Amazon, you can go to slayingthefoodmyth.com. I've got some information there about it. But otherwise, just go to Amazon and pick yourself up a copy. If you're ready to get it, why not?
Great. No, that sounds great. And we appreciate you writing this. And so anyways, I appreciate David's time to share this information and his perspective on the book, and Dr. Chaney and everybody tonight for being on. Really appreciate you all, and thank you for being here. And if you want to join us on the future chats, just let me or the person that invited you know, and we'll get you set up there. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.